Humans are driven by a desire to make meaning. We're storytellers. And when we struggle, a very natural first place that we go is wanting to answer the question, why are we in pain? Why are we hurting? Why are we sad? Why can't we stop fighting? Whatever it is that we're struggling with, we want to know the reason. With ambiguous loss, very quickly, we're able to answer the question, why?
I don't want to speak for Pauline, but I think she would agree with me that none of us are immune to loss. Loss is a part of being a human being, and it's difficult and it's challenging, but it can also be something that means more than just that loss. And I think her theory helps us think about how to make it mean more.
I think more than many other theories, ambiguous loss theory is flexible in a way of pushing our understanding. And I think with the COVID-19 pandemic, so many of us saw the loss, in particular of structure in our lives and structure in our policies and literally how buildings functioned with people in them and people not in them. For me, ambiguous loss theory is about pushing the boundaries of how we think about gender and gender identity. But I think for many other people, it's also about just pushing our boundaries of how we can imagine our world going forward, because our world is defined by relationships.
Ambiguous loss is about context. And that's why the theory means a lot to me, because I know it affects more lives than we know of, and in ways that we will probably never really understand.
A woman in the night races down a long street, one that is normally overflowing with people. The streets and sidewalks teeming, bursting at the seams. However, in the dead of night, there is nothing but the sound of silence. Only her footsteps, ricocheting off the cold concrete floor, dare to make a sound. And, as she flies by street after street, she cradles a pink bundle. The luminescent moon hangs over her head. And then she gently steadies to a walk and places the pink bundle on the ground as she whispers a solemn, "I love you," as she sees her child, the pink bundle, for the last time. That is what I'd like to say happened. But in all honesty, I have no idea. How does something I can't even remember seep so deeply into every aspect of my life? Ambiguous loss can look like a lot of different things. It could be a parent leaving their child at a young age. It could be a friend who went missing in a tsunami and was never found. It could be a relative with Alzheimer's or dementia who slowly forgets who you are. There's always that question, that why. Where are you? Why did you leave me? Why did it happen like this? And those questions turning and turning in the back of your head will always be there.
Ambiguous loss. It is a common type of loss that we have been struggling to make sense of for a long time. Leaving without goodbye, goodbye without leaving, was a way that these types of losses, plural, within that larger ambiguous loss frame, were being presented, and I resonated with it a lot. I use ambiguous loss theory and understandings in a variety of different ways through my clinical work and through outreach efforts with the Medical Reserve Corps at the University of Minnesota. In all of my clinical applications, one way or another, ambiguous loss comes up, and having a name for it oftentimes is the turning point for people from struggling with something to figuring out different ways to manage it.
Ambiguous loss impacted everything about our work with family caregivers. More than half of the family caregivers we serve are struggling to care for somebody with Alzheimer's or related dementia. Dr. Boss's work is about resiliency and the strength of these family caregivers to, if they just have a name for what's going on with them, and they learn some techniques about how to navigate it, that not only will they just survive the journey, hopefully, but they'll be able to get through it knowing that they found those precious times in there, that they're looking at it differently, and that they really had meaning and hope restored in their lives, and that they will then go on and be able to transition out to life after caregiving.
I think more than many other theories, ambiguous loss theory, it forces us to think about if relationships rupture or change, right? Even if we experience this kind of boundary ambiguity, ambiguous loss asks us to think about, yes, we have this loss, but where can we change our relationships so that they don't rupture anymore?
We can never take away the pain. We can just say, let's kind of deal with it in a different way, knowing that it's always going to be there.
What's the origin of the theory of ambiguous loss? The first conference I presented at was in Toronto for the National Council on Family Relations. The military were in the audience and came up to me afterwards and said they would have data that I could use for my doctoral dissertation, that they had data and no theory, and I had a theory and no data. Would I be interested? And in that case, of course, they were talking about the soldiers missing in action in the Vietnam War. And with a naval health, a research social worker, and I went up and down the coast of California interviewing wives of men missing in action. And that was the first research on this theory of ambiguous loss.
There are many other more nuanced ways that people experience ambiguous losses. For instance, if someone is using substances and they're still present with you, but they're not really fully present, or if they're working all the time and they're present, but they're not really emotionally available.
And when people are physically missing, certainly in the context of terrorist attacks, weather-related events, then it's the other way around. Then somebody is very psychologically there, but they're physically not. And that, of course, is another type of ambiguous loss.
After 9/11 in New York City, a Bloomberg reporter came to my office at Hunter, where I was that year. And he said, "Why aren't we over it yet?" And I said, "Because you're trying to get over it. Who could get over 9/11? I can't, living here, but if you lived in New York, you certainly won't, and nor should they. We need to memorialize and remember. We do not need to find closure." So when 9/11 happened, I got a phone call from the wife of the president of the union, 32BJ of SEIU, and she asked me to come in as soon as possible so we could organize an intervention for the families of the missing. And a student came forward, Ty Mendenhall, now Professor Mendenhall.
She brought along me and another graduate student, and then others with sequential trips to make sense of ambiguous loss in relation to those attacks. And it was truly a building the ship as we sailed it type of experience.
But we got to New York City, which was enshrouded with smoke and terrible, terrible smells. And people were walking very slowly on the crowded sidewalks, holding up pictures of a loved one saying, "Have you seen her? Have you seen him?" And it was just like an overwhelming hell of ambiguous loss at that time.
The reason 9/11, I think, was a really important step for Pauline was because it took her from a space of individuals experiencing tragedy to a collective experience of ill-defined loss. What Pauline did was really pioneer approaches that were perhaps reinforced by the cultures from which people came, but also revealed the fact that that commonality of experience and the ability to create meaning and identity in those spaces was hugely valuable as a therapeutic tool. I think it's worth noting that a lot of those people involved in that work were migrants. There were people who were involved in support services around the Twin Towers. So first of all, it's a much more natural approach for many people in those cultures to do something collective. We found people who found their experience incomprehensible, if you bring them together to share that experience, it becomes more believable because people can reinforce, I'm the wife of a missing person. And if there's lots of people sharing that experience, and potentially there's a facilitator who says, you're suffering from ambiguous loss. This is why you feel that way. So you reinforce those meanings using a collective social space to do so.
What you're after with ambiguous loss is a transformation of thinking. My loved one is gone, and they usually say it's my fault. And there was one woman who had a newborn right after 9/11 who was in the group, and she was crying a great deal. And she said, do you remember the story I told you right after 9/11, that it was my fault that my husband was in the building at 9 a.m. He ordinarily was in the building at 8 a.m. and was out by 9. So it's my fault I didn't wake him. She said, I see it differently now. And this would be after she talked for almost a year with all these other families. She said, he always set the alarm clock himself. I never did. So I think he just wanted another hour to be with us before he died. So that's a transformation that you hope for. What you're trying to do is to get people to transform the story of the missing person to a place where they can live with that story in a more positive way. And that really helps.
I think we won't fully know the impact of Pauline for at least a couple of 100 years because she has had an organizing and central impact on this field.
Pauline's impact on the field is difficult to articulate because it's that big.
I don't think we can quantify it. I think she's sort of a national treasure because the impact is so far-reaching and so global.
She hasn't really had an impact on the field. She's created a new field. She's created a rigorous, demonstrably efficacious approach to working with people who are suffering from ill-defined loss.
Her work makes us all connected. Maybe that's the legacy, is that we are all connected. And in doing the work that she does, it connects us to our humanity.